We're short on medics and short on doctors at that point, because a lot of the doctors and other people had left already, had gone home, because it looked like the war was quote unquote winding down, which it wasn't. So there was this rush of combat between the two sides, and people were getting butchered, and we had to go and get them, on these cargo planes. I got the lecture from the nurse. She was telling me some of these guys are going to be so badly wounded that we can't waste time on them, and you're going to have to put them behind that curtain over there and let them die.
Ask a Vet is dedicated to documenting and preserving veteran stories in their own words on their own terms before their stories are gone forever. Each episode is an unfiltered conversation about who they were before service during war and their adjustment to coming home. If you believe these stories matter, please subscribe, like, comment, and share. Your support helps us preserve the voices of those who served. Ask a Vet is proud to partner with Utah Honor Flight, part of the National Honor Flight Network, giving veterans the trip of a lifetime to Washington, D.C. to visit the memorials built in their honor. Every flight is free to veterans and made possible by generous donors. To learn more or support the mission, visit utahhonorflight.org or find your local hub at honorflight.org. And now back to the show.
Patrick Dillon, born in Hell's Kitchen, parents Irish immigrants, raised in a working class hard hat kind of culture, ditch diggers, construction workers, and firemen and cops. My father eventually became a fireman after he became a cop. And then at a point in my very formative years, unfortunately, they all moved. The white flight moved out to Long Island, to Suffolk County, to get away from the city, and landed me in a high school. And graduated from a high school out there in Suffolk County, and then was either going to become a cop, or at the last minute I got a little bit of a scholarship for sports, for ice hockey and baseball. I went to Iona because I wanted to play pro sports as opposed to dig ditches, and was good at it, really good enough to be possibly
in hockey or baseball or
hockey
both?
And baseball.
Wow.
Yeah.
Which one did you like more?
I loved hockey because you could smash the shit out of people and do it. It was a way to have that energy become part of the game. It's a blood sport. And if you're not covered in blood when it's over, you didn't really commit to the game itself. And got good. Bobby Orr, I don't know if you know Bobby Orr, who he was. He was a god, and I was his stick boy briefly. And I modeled my whole game after him, and just believed I could possibly play for the Bruins, right, or play for the Yanks. My uncle was a pitcher, and he and Whitey Ford were best friends. And he pitched and pitched and pitched, and they were both going to sign contracts with the Yankees, right? And Pearl Harbor was bombed, and he joined the Navy the next day. And same name as me, Patrick Dillon. His uncle, Patrick Dillon, was a coal stoker on the Titanic, survived the sinking of the Titanic. He was 16 years old.
Oh, my gosh.
And this guy survived the sinking of the Indianapolis with the sharks and the atomic bomb parts and all of that story. They thought he was dead. They announced his death from the altar of a church over in Hell's Kitchen, and my grandmother's mother flipped out, never recovered, and he came marching back home a month later, still in one piece, but obsessed with sharks, as I became, without even knowing any of this. He became a wire lather, lived with her, both crazy as rats in a shoebox, built the Verrazano, built the trade towers with the steel and the concrete. Yeah. And I was going to be fitting into that kind of world as a worker, but then I saw how much money you could make as a golfer. I had a caddy. I had to go and get a job and make some money to provide money for for the family, that was part of the culture, get to work, 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 work. And I started caddying, and this pro taught me how to play golf, right? Because those guys made millions.
And how old are you at this point when you did
15, 16.
Okay.
And then eventually, into college with hockey and baseball. And I really wanted to play pro hockey or maybe I threw a no-hitter in front of a big load of bird dogs, real serious scouts, right? No-hitter, struck out 17 out of 21. I still have the baseball. I don't know if you saw it.
That's
still
great.
have it. This was 1967. 66, maybe 67, the year my best friend was killed in Vietnam. We were hockey teammates, and he was 2 years ahead of me, and got his draft notice, went off to war, right? Billy Quinn came home in a box 2 weeks after his deployment, and we all had to go to this funeral up in the Bronx at this cemetery that was mostly Irish people, and we were all standing there, and nobody even knew where Vietnam was. We never even heard of it, really, and the girls are all crying because he was a really popular kid, and he's sitting there in a coffin. And then they show up with the 21 gun thing, and they fire it off. Everybody's weeping and just shaking our heads, like, why is Billy dead? What is Vietnam? What is that? What is Vietnam? And I found out.
If you or someone you know isn't getting the VA benefits you've earned, click the link in our description. We've teamed up with a group of experts that help veterans build stronger VA claims and get the benefits they deserve. Click the link in our description for a free consultation. When your friend was killed, you were 15?
16.
16. What was going through your head at that point?
Just shaking. Why is Billy dead? What is Vietnam? What is this? Because we were inside this hard hat world, which was not the peace movement and the hippies. This is the 60s, but none of that came near us as immigrant hard hat people and cultures. We weren't allowed anywhere near that shit. Right?
Did you feel like it was going to happen to you, or was it just still felt far away?
I had no idea. I had no idea what was going to happen. Moment to moment to moment with any of my life. My family were crazy, moving, and a lot of drama and violence inside the family system. My father had become a fireman. He'd become a roaring, fire-eating alcoholic and a maniac. And that's kind of the world I lived in. So there was nothing nailed down about anything like the future or professional life, or you're going to go to film school. We love movies, nothing like that.
Yeah.
Nothing like that at all. It was minute to minute. And he's sitting in that casket, dead, right? And Vietnam was something maybe mentioned on the news that my mother had. She had 4 televisions in this railroad flat, right? Because she thought if we had TV, we have arrived, right? And she was really conscious about being an immigrant and being slagged about that, but thought that the more TVs she had, the more she could call herself an American and middle class, because she wasn't. And we would hear it, maybe body counts and maybe discussed by Cronkite or somebody, but it was still something far away, You couldn't, like with these kids, you couldn't. I'm sure they can't find Iran on a map if you pointed it out to them. Right.
How did you end up going to Vietnam then?
Well, because I got a draft number because I was of age, right? And they assigned it to this Lotto Girls moment.
Yeah, tell me about that night in the bar. What was that?
It was on North Avenue in New Rochelle, and it was announced that they were going to democratize the draft so that no one could really duck the draft. We all had to go and sit there while she, on the TV screen above us, started spinning the cage and the ping pong balls were rolling around inside of it.
And she's wearing a bikini, you said?
She's wearing a bikini.
To tell people where they're going to war.
Hot girl. So that keeps your eyes on the screen. And she's plucking these ping pong balls out. And she's announcing the birth date and the number, right? And this theoretically was random.
And is the bar packed?
Packed with screaming kids my age.
Were you with friends or were you by yourself?
No, I mean, I don't know if anybody else was in there. I don't remember the details of who else was in there with me, but I was glued to the screen because I came from a warrior cult, right? They all fought in World War II. They all fought, some of them in World War I as doughboys. They all fought the Brits toe-to-toe for 100 years in Ireland. That's why they had to leave.
Yeah.
Right? They invented guerrilla war in Kerry. So there was the Irish war culture was in me and inculcated into me as a child, right? By this kind of the original was to get the Brits out of Ireland and get Ireland back for the Irish, and it was really serious and bloody. And the anniversary just came, the Easter Rebellion. They hung my great-grandfather for writing pamphlets, asking politely for the British to give the Irish people permission to vote, even though they weren't allowed to vote unless you owned land.
Right.
And that's how they manipulated power in Ireland and kept it a plantation and kept it British.
Yeah.
And the Irish finally rose up with whatever they could get their hands on. And successfully, after a bloodbath of struggle, threw the Brits out of the 26 counties. In my case, I'm sitting there in this packed bar, 1970, a true believer, if you will, a country-loving, very patriotic, very, very Catholic kid, right? And they were these 9-foot-tall Chinese and Russian-speaking, baby-eating monsters that were going to wind up in California unless we stopped them, right? We were supposed to make the world safe for democracy and kill every godless commie on earth. This was the kind of brainwashing, if you will, but not really brainwashing. There's a very big element of truth to it. These were totalitarian regimes which were slaughtering their own people if they farted the wrong way, and they were taking over Southeast Asia, right? And the invasions, they said, would wind up in California unless we stopped them. And I was breastfed this stuff as a culture, you know. And I really couldn't wait myself because the assignment was very heroic. We saw all the movies that they made after the war, the Second World War, very heroic films about the bravery, you know, and the ridiculously impossible odds sometimes, and winning that, you know, battle after battle after battle. And we went to every single one of those movies. Hell's Kitchen had 32 movie theaters, and these people went to the movies almost every night.
There was a sense of anticipation in that bar for you,
well,
in that sense.
Either you were going to Vietnam or you were going to graduate school, and she was in charge of that fate.
Okay.
The quote unquote random moments of it, the karma of it was, which ping pong ball am I, you know? And mine came up October 16th, and the number was 3s, right? And I was going.
What hit you right then?
I rose out of my body. I had an out of body experience in that bar. And I'm hovering above everybody, and they're screaming and drinking and celebrating that they're not going. And I knew, I swear to you, this happened. I knew I was going. I didn't want to be drafted. I went down to Times Square the next day and volunteered. There's a big Times Square recruiting center, right? Still there. And walked in there and had a conversation with the guy who was in there, the soldier, you know, and volunteered.
Did you tell anybody you were going, or you just went?
I don't know if I told anybody, quote unquote. I went, and you know, my family knew, and he dangled the Marines. He dangled. He said, become a medic. You have a M16 in one hand and a bag of medicine in the other. You can save people and you can kill people at the same time. And the nurses are hot, And I signed on as a medic because it sounded really, really interesting.
In the Army or which
Army?
Army, okay.
Army, yeah. Army, United States Army, 91 Alpha, 91 Bravo, combat medic and surgical support. United States Army Medical Corps.
And how soon were you in boot camp?
Within, I don't know, month and a half. Fort Dix.
Tell me about that.
Well, it was saying goodbye to the girl in Rockefeller Center in the pouring rain and snow. And she was my love of my whole life. She was a Jewish girl from Brooklyn. I was this Irish kid from Hell's Kitchen, and just adored each other. Romeo and Juliet was in the background. We actually saw the movie. We knew we were fucked, and we're hugging each other out. And she's telling me, "I'll be here when you come home." Right? And I was in uniform, and I jumped on the bus and went back to Dix, and then went from Dix to combat medical school, and then from medical school to jungle school. What
was boot camp like for you?
I loved it. I mean, it was kind of in my genes to succeed in that world. They just dismember you and build you back into a killer. Not that I didn't have any of that in me already as a survivor of a lot of really bloody beatings.
Did you get along with your drill sergeants and stuff?
Yeah, all of it. Oh, I loved it. I took to it. I really wanted to do what they were telling me, make the world safe for democracy. There's a book called The True Believer. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
Yeah.
He spends a whole bunch of time on soldiers who brought that set of energies into their own consciousness, if you will, and become exactly what you're supposed to be, right? This is not a video game. It's not a fucking television show. It's kill the commies, make the world safe for democracy, and come home and get big hugs and kisses for having done the job. And it's still a pretty good idea, since we know so much more about Putin and Xi and those kinds of trillionaire communists.
Okay, where did you go to medic school?
Fort Sam Houston. It's an Army medical school. We learn about everything except the physics and the biology. You just learn how to stop the bleeding.
And how long were you there? How long was that?
That was about 6 months.
And did you enjoy that?
I loved it. Because it's like carpentry, You're examining somebody who's bleeding out, and you find the bleeders. And they were doing it with anatomical simulations and stuff like that. So it was really clear that it was important, and that the job was to keep them alive. Keep them alive. Stop the bleeding. Press it off. Use the tools in that bag to keep them alive as long as possible, so that somebody else at some point could stabilize and then do whatever they needed to do surgically.
What happened?
It was I'm 18 and a half years old, and I'm doing carpentry on human beings. That this was the compelling part of it. And I loved it. Why wouldn't you? These are my this was Billy Quinn in a way.
So what happened after that?
I was supposed to be assigned to a special forces unit and go in that way. But everything at that point was chaos on the other end because of the peace treaty signing, and the war was in some crazy never land of limbo as far as the timing and the peace treaty discussions.
And this is 70, right?
No, this is 71 now.
71, okay.
Early 71.
Okay.
And then I flew out, not assigned to the Green Beret unit, but landed in Okinawa, waiting more orders.
Did you go on a commercial airline or a Flying Tigers airline? Or
no, I didn't go on a commercial. I came home on the Vietnam Airlines.
Okay.
Landed in Okinawa, which was there was a hospital there packed with amputees, and my first job was to it's called Stump duty, where you smell the amputation. 240,000 arms and legs were left in the jungles, so this place was packed with armless and legless grunts.
Hold it. And stump duty, you said. Describe that for me again.
With stump duty, you take the bandage off, whatever it is, the arm or the elbow or the knee, and you smell the stump. And if it smells bad, it's infected and has to be reopened, and all the infected flesh has to be carved out again. Yeah, and then they asked for volunteers to fly on these C-130s that had been retrofitted as surgical units, and because they were short on medics and short on doctors at that point, because a lot of the doctors and other people had left already, had gone home, because it looked like the war was quote unquote winding down, which it wasn't, because part of the discussions with the peace treaty was that troops of the enemy and our troops would be able to stay in place wherever they were found, including in the South. So there was this rush of combat between the two sides, and people were getting butchered, and we had to go and get them, on these cargo planes.
So you volunteered to do that?
Yeah, no, I'm still volunteer to do that.
And so you were trained. You were going to be over there, probably in country in Vietnam somewhere.
Yeah, I couldn't wait.
But did you ever end up doing that, or was it just on the planes then at that point? Did you ever end up doing that in Vietnam, or was everything on the planes from the time you volunteered on
No,
there?
I wasn't in the jungles.
Okay.
No, I was purely assigned to stabilize and keep them alive.
And describe the planes for me.
Well, if you've ever seen Born on the 4th of July, that movie with Tom Cruise, inside the cargo plane, they had rebuilt them, retrofitted them with tiny little surgical units about the size of this. There was 4 of them, 2 on each side. The table, the lights, the sterility, and we'd pick the wounded people up at the airports, Tan Son Nhut, and a couple of other places. They were already fucked up, and we would bring them into these surgical units and open them up again. And the doctors, the surgeons, and the nurses would judge whether they were worth saving or not, or go right to work with me assisting the surgeries. And it was like a short hallway with 2 on each side of them.
Wow. Was there 4 doctors usually? 4 surgeons, or just depended?
Yeah, they were pretty well staffed, because they had to be well staffed to be doing this. First of all, there weren't that many planes anymore, and this one was the 498th Army Air Force, the last unit that was double teamed with Army Air Force, and it was based in the mountains of Thailand, the cargo planes, the same base as the B-52s. And they would, like Federal Express, we would just fly in and out of the war, picking up the wounded, picking up the body bags, and the volunteers would do all that humping work like me,
How long was a flight round trip, usually?
Oh, God. 4 hours, something like that.
So pretty fast, actually.
Yeah, it had to be. These guys were sucking chest wounds and near death, so we had to get them out of there and get them back to that Okinawa facility to have them really be, worked on more completely surgically.
When you volunteered for that, how long had you been over there?
I don't know, 3 weeks.
Wow.
Because the call went out, and I wanted more war,
And your first, give me the first.
I wanted to do what I was asked to do,
Describe the first one you went on, the first mission. Were you excited about it? Do you remember it?
The flight was, I got the lecture from the nurse, So, she was telling me some of these guys are going to be so badly wounded that we can't waste time on them. And you're going to have to put them behind that curtain over there and let them die. We'll judge that. It's called triage. And she goes through each one to make sure that the time spent on each one of those casualties is worth spending. And your job will be, if I give you the signal, to take them out of here and put them behind the curtain. And that kind of woke me up, because I had to do a mercy killing on one of them at some point, at another point down the road. He got his balls blown off and wanted somebody to kill him because he didn't want to go back to the Bronx without his balls, and he knew it. And I prayed and prayed and prayed over this guy to have God, my Catholic God, to take this guy, take him, and he wouldn't die. He just kept screaming. And I then prayed and prayed and prayed and thought I was guided to put a big load of morphine into him, run it right into his heart, stopped his heart. And I think that's when that's when it became war as opposed to a movie, and that's what it was from then on until the peace treaty got signed. Either in that hospital doing stump duty or flying these surgical hospital units. And
how often were you flying?
It depended on what the pressure was to get going, or how many, because the casualties were brought to these air bases either alive or dead, and those reports dictated when the planes would be flying. So it was up and down. There was a lot of casualties, and the planes were flying almost all the time, and so the shortage of staffers was basically announced on a daily basis, and my commander was thrilled that I would just, let me go. And I really wanted more of that, because it felt like more than just, sitting around talking shit, and I wanted to smell it. I wanted to be, I don't know. I want to be part of something important, politically, if you will, or to avenge Billy Quinn's death in some ways, and to win, right? There wasn't a winner or a loser yet. That didn't happen until Saigon in 1975, right? This was still possible according to the culture on the ground and among us, We could still win. We could still defeat these people, which is what we were told was the point of all of this, right? A tie is like kissing your sister, like win a war or don't do it, whatever that means, right? And I was brought up inside of that, because it was really cold, hot war with commies and Russians and Chinese and Nazis and all of that was very real stuff in my world, and remained that way with the post-war between the enemies of this country coming out of the Second World War into the form of China and Russia, and remained that way in my world, the hard hat world, as a serious dynamic, if you will, of freedom versus totalitarianism, And I was also really bookish as I read everything that Solzhenitsyn had written about the gulags. I'd read Ayn Rand. I'd read a lot about war and a lot about the enemy, quote unquote, and about,
Even back then you had.
Even back then, I would go to the library as a kid and build like these walls of books around me and just read all afternoon. Now, besides playing hockey, I was transformed by books. You saw the books in there. Those were going to be in the garbage pails all up by Columbia. And they're sacred. Books are sacred. Books took me out of this nightmare of Hell's Kitchen and Irish alcoholism for an afternoon, But I also learned a lot about everything that was in those books, right? Encyclopedic, if you will. Encyclopedias were my favorite books.
I like
the
those
Botanic
too.
Encyclopedia. Yep. They smelled so beautifully,
It's cool to go look up stuff that you didn't know anything about.
Yeah, all of it remains for me important, right?
Take me back on the plane. So what was your duties? What was the day-to-day? What was that like?
Clean it up. Pfizer wash the table. Next, clean the instruments, clean everything, make sure everything is ready to go for the next one and the one after that. And some hands-on support,
During the surgery, you mean?
One time they brought in this pilot who had his stomach was all distended by so much internal bleeding, and they could not find out why he was bleeding so much. And I found a tiny little hole in his heel, right? Some Kong or NVA had took a pot shot at his cockpit and went through the cockpit into his heel, ran up his leg and into his belly. And I'm the one that found the wound. And I felt really proud of that, because then they figured out how to stop it and stop the internal bleeding and saved his life, because it was bleeding from that into his functional and really important organs inside of him. So stuff like that, little stuff like that made me happy, made me feel like I was part of something.
Well, was it kind of a well-oiled machine on that plane, or was it just chaos?
No, it was both. It was well-oiled chaos. I had to be the oiler. I had to keep everything spotless and wash all the blood off and scrub it all down again to prepare for the next event, And so that was my breeding, if you will, into crisis medicine, and haven't stopped since.
Any other experiences while we're still over there that stand out in your mind on that?
No, that one. I mean, the one rule about who gets treated and who doesn't still remains a tough job for that nurse and a tough job for me, and a tough job for them. The idea that time and priorities are really important, and don't waste time on someone who's got mortal injuries. That was sobering, if you will, for a kid. Like I had to be the one to to put him behind the curtain, and essentially say, "See you later."
Were they usually unconscious? Were they usually unconscious?
No. You don't.
Oh, man.
A lot of them don't die like that. They die screaming, sucking chest wounds. No, they scream themselves into death. This number, 1,500 Irish-born American soldiers died in Vietnam. They were offered the green card if they went off to war. 1,500 Irish-born American soldiers died in Vietnam. And these are kids my age. These are, these were my brothers, and my brothers that were screaming, and their chest wounds you make that every time the heart beats, the chest is sucking blood and pushing it out again.
When you would how many guys would you load? I mean, how many soldiers that were injured would you load onto the plane? Usually, was there
probably hundreds, I would say.
Wow.
And body bags. We had to hump the body bags out too. That's what was for me the hardest job, because they were inside these body bags, and you knew there was some body in there. We had to hump body bags out of the shelters after COVID set in New York with the National Guard friends of mine. We had to go to these shelters with U-Haul trucks and hump the body bags out. And I had all these like flashbacks from that other part of it, because there's a person in there. We had to drive them from Brooklyn all the way to Randall's Island and load them into these refrigerator trucks.
Wow.
Right? Because nobody claimed them. They were homeless people.
Wow.
And it was the same weight. You'll never, ever forget the weight of someone in a bag like that. You know? I wrote a whole essay called Body Bag about my life because I became a human body bag, if you will, on the way home. I'm in the plane and...
this is after Vietnam?
No, this is when this treaty was signed on the 3rd of May, and I got my orders to go home on the 5th of May, and I'm on the plane, jammed against the window, and I look down the hall, the aisle, and all of these dead Vietnamese children start marching down the hall, the aisle, and jump into me. Right? They jumped, their souls, or I was hallucinating or something, and they came inside of me. Right? And I let them. As a Catholic, I thought that this was going to be my job now to carry these souls, these dead souls, around for the rest of my days. You know, because at that point, after the carpet bombing of Hanoi and Haiphong, it became just so senseless. Right? Just the slaughter was really all that was being done. Just slaughter on both sides. Just slaughter, slaughter, slaughter. Crucifixions, carpet bombing was a word invented by the Kissinger White House, if you will. Carpet bombing means this whole room is covered in bomb craters, right? Carpet the room, carpet Hanoi with bombs, as in what they just did, as in shock and awe in Baghdad, which I was underneath.
At the time when you were, did you ever do local people on the plane, or was it all soldiers? You know, like Vietnamese that were hurt?
No,
it was just soldiers.
No, I mean the one opportunity I did have with the locals, there was an air base called Vung Toi, and it was a CIA base primarily. And we landed there a couple of times because they had injured and mostly body bags. And this was handled by they're indigenous people. They don't consider themselves Vietnam.
Is it the Montagnais?
Montagnards.
Yeah, Montagnard, yeah.
And the Montagnard chieftain came to the commander there, and he pleaded with the commander to send somebody with him back to the Ville. And his granddaughter, I think it was, she was about 13 or 14. She was pregnant out to here, right? And the baby's leg was hanging out of her pussy, right? And it was upside down. It was breached. And I didn't know anything really about any of that, except that this thing was still alive, right? So I did a C-section on her with my jungle knife, right? I knew there was 6 layers, and I found the head, make sure I didn't cut the head, opened it up, pulled the baby out, little afro. Some American GI had fucked this little girl and made her pregnant. She ripped the umbilical cord with her teeth, and the baby just was dropped into her embrace, and I took off back to the airbase. You know, that was the one different kind of moment that my tools and principles and skills were applied to, you know.
And when those moments happened for you, you didn't freeze up. You just jumped into it.
Well, because it's adrenaline and it's important, you know, and you're trained. The training is first rate, you know. Don't think, don't breathe, get the job done, you know. That's what you're trained to do for war, if you will, or other kinds of experience like that, for crisis medicine, you know. Get the tool, stop the bleeding, keep them alive, and breathe about it or think about it or reflect on it later on at chow, you know.
Okay.
And I love that. You know, that's still there, and it's a very, very, very valuable tool in the bag. In Haiti, I had to do it again with these little kids that were being amputated from gangrenous wounds after the earthquake, and they would drag them out of the buildings and bring them to us. And we did emergency pediatric surgery on his children. I had to hold this girl. We didn't have anesthesia, and her whole head was split into two, right? From some piece of steel that had chopped her face into two pieces. And I'm holding this little girl while this Haitian-born pediatric surgeon is sewing her face back together again, right? And these kids who had arms or legs chopped off were playing soccer 2 weeks later, right, with one leg and crutches.
Wow.
But this is for me, the twisted circumstance of the Lauer girl brought all of this as an opportunity to do something with my life, if you will, that still resonates. If there's something like that, an earthquake or Yugoslavia and Kosovo and Ground Zero, opportunities to not just stand around and talk shit, but do something about it, right?
Back up just a little bit. How long did you serve then in Vietnam? How long were you there?
I was overseas a year and a half. I was in the Army officially almost 3, but I was over there from, I don't know, May of 71 to, no, actually, when did I get there? I got there 71. I think a tour and a half, more or less, and then they signed a treaty in May.
So you re-upped. You finished one term, and then
I wanted to continue. Yeah. So I told my staff sergeant that, and he got the paperwork done.
Did people think you were crazy for re-upping, or no?
It wasn't kind of jungle grunt culture, so there was no like, what are you, out of your mind,
Yeah.
Back to, mosquitoes and
you told me you loved it.
I loved it. I thought I was part of something important.
You felt useful on there. You were doing something useful.
The family traditions were there, and I thought we were going to win. All right. When Saigon fell, it was like somebody had put a sword right through my heart, because then the shame came. Coming home was a big shaming moment for me with the baby killer. But then it got far worse when I finally arrived back in my warrior culture world. Yeah, they were 4 feet tall. You guys lost. First war we ever lost. And they would blame me directly, right? So the shame stain of that was so fucking tormenting, and the stain of it never left, right? And the reaction to that was somehow to make up for it somehow, as a medic, and never talk about the war ever again with anyone, because it could come right up.
Okay, back up just a little bit. You're on the plane. You see those kids come
in and hop up inside of me.
How did that end on the plane? Were you just startled awake, or what?
No,
what happened?
I was watching it happen, and I was welcoming them.
Oh, it was a good thing.
Well, because I was a Catholic kid who believed that that's what I had to do then for the rest of my life, was carry these kids, their souls, forever and ever,
And you landed in, tell me that story.
Airport.
Yeah, tell me that story.
We landed in San Francisco airport. And I'm still, really conscious of what's inside of me now, and not too much conscious of anything else, including this anti-war demonstration and screaming and ho Chi Minh, all this stuff. And this girl runs up and puts the icing on that cake, baby killer.
And you thought, give me a little background the way you described it before. You thought she was this pretty girl. You thought
she was running right up to me, had her eyes locked up on my eyes. I saw her. I turned. I thought, wow, I'm going to get a big hug from this pretty girl with a tie-dye mini dress on and a gold headband. and she wants to welcome me home. This was, quick stuff, second to second stuff. And she runs right up, and I'm open up like this, and then she screams. She lowers her head in right by my ear and starts screaming, "Baby killer," over and over again. "Baby killer, baby killer." And then she clams all over me, a big spittle over my meager little medals. And then she's dragged away by the cops, and I was forever changed by that, forever and ever. I let that accusation define the rest of my life, right? As you see the babies here, that's an echo of all of that, right? I've worked with babies everywhere in all the war zones and earthquake zones. Children, babies are the most sacred, God-like creatures ever made, and they're all being slaughtered as we speak by 50 different countries still to this day, right? And I was not allowed to have any because I was exposed to Agent Orange.
Okay.
I was going to have 6-headed children, and the woman I had married wanted to get out of get out of show business and move to New Jersey and have a couple of kids. And I had never told her about why that was not going to happen until I didn't tell her. She announced this on our wedding night. And I had learned enough about Agent Orange doing the research and writing that screenplay that it was a bad idea for me to have children, right? But I didn't have any way to tell her that. And I just flipped out after that and wound up locked up in a nut house because of Agent Orange and because of that draft lotto girl.
You landed in San Francisco. Where'd you end up after that?
We got on those transports and they drove us to Oakland Army Air Terminal, which was across the bay, which was a military installation where you get your discharge, you get your $600, you get your papers, your DD-214, and you get to throw and tear your uniform off and rip it into pieces and throw it in this big wooden box. And the guy next to me is unloading about 3 automatic weapons, an M4 and 2 M16s out of his duffel bag. And I was like, "Wow, where are you going?" All right. And he said, "Fuck you, white guy. I'm going back to Chicago. Fuck you." And that was welcome home too,
So you took the uniform off and never talked about it?
I dropped it into the box, and if you want the narrative of coming home, as it got crazier and more weird, and I got my money, got my papers, and walked out to the edge of Oakland Army Air Terminal, imagined a line. I jumped over the line and I was home, quote unquote. Started hitchhiking down Highway 1, the Pacific Coast Highway, on my way to Arizona to visit my older brother who had ducked the draft and broke my father's heart. And I stepped into his role as a soldier. And he had been set up by the Westies, the Irish mafia, as a drug dealer, and he had a big ranch out in Arizona. I was going to go see him first, right? But this guy picked me up in a pickup truck, right? And he started asking me all these weird questions, like, "Did you really cut off their ears and make necklaces out of them? Did you really do that kind of stuff?" And he was like really creepy, this guy, right? And he said, "Yeah, you can come to my family farm for the night. I'll let you stay over there, right?" And I'm like, I don't know, I got out of the pickup truck and I made camp right on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean, base camp of my own.
This is your first night home?
First night home.
Oh my gosh.
And the next morning, right, I saw this newspaper with his face on the front page, right? He had cooked and eaten his grandmother and his mother and put them both in a bathtub. And he was the first serial killer. They identified this guy, that was him. And then I kept hitchhiking all the way to my brother's ranch, right? And I got there and it's like hippie heaven, and there, naked women and the swimming pool packed with drugs and money, this ranch, right? And he shows me this piece of napkin, right, with a big purple stain inside the napkin. He said, "Here, I want you to do something. Put this under your tongue." Right? It turned out to be a massive hit of blotter acid, right? And I put it under my tongue, and it started. And it was right near this place called Mount Lemon, which is a big mountain in the desert of Arizona. And the trip started, and I started tripping. And they had speakers in the desert, and they started playing acid rock, which was a genre.
Yeah.
And that made it even more intense, right? And the mountain started like vibrating, and it turned into that baby that I had cut out of this little girl's stomach, right? The baby and I were breathing back and forth. And, I didn't know what to do or say about it. This was an acid trip, right? And then I wanted it to stop. And the more you attempt to make it stop, the darker it becomes, right? And then my brother just let me wander off into the desert, right? And I'm having sunstroke and bleeding or blisters, and I'm screaming, and I became a napalm strike at the end of this thing, and it was a nightmare that I finally came out of, surrounded by sheepdogs. And this farmer had a sheep ranch, and these dogs are barking and screaming at me, and I'm barking back at these sheepdogs, right? Coming out of an acid trip. This is the third day of my welcome home, right? This was, and it hasn't gotten any less surreal or crazy since then, right? And this is 1973. What's that? 53 years ago. It has not stopped being crazy, right? Especially after Saigon fell. And I'm in the Peace Corps back there when it happens.
Where are you at this point? You're back where? You're back where?
In Southeast Asia. I was in Thailand in the Peace Corps when Saigon fell.
And that's 75?
Yeah. I had got into the back door of Notre Dame through a monastery. I went into a monastery out in Indiana because I was just so shaken and could not talk about Nam, did not want to. Stayed that way for a long time, right?
So you just kept that to yourself. You didn't let anybody know?
Nobody. And that's what almost killed me, keeping a secret like that. And went back to Southeast Asia, believing that I could make amends for what had been done to those people through the Peace Corps. It wasn't the War Corps anymore. It was the Peace Corps, malaria control. And it got more and more surreal and movie-like after that. I didn't even start drinking until I was in my late 20s after Saigon fell, and a bunch of heartbreak from that girl. She wasn't there. And I picked up my first mind and mood-altering substance, which was a Kent-long cigarette. And I smoked it like you're supposed to smoke a joint. And I went numb, right? It's called cardiopulmonary infarction, where your whole body just shuts down, you go numb. And I didn't have to feel anything after that, right? I went back to her house, like, you said you're going to, she's smoking a cigarette. I thought I'd look like James Dean or something, and she'd want me back, right? She said, "I told you, you were gone too long, Patrick. Do you want my boyfriend to tell you the same thing? I'll call him," and he was somebody was in there, some guy. And I stumbled away smoking the second one. I bummed off this waiter and developed this elaborate repertory of painkillers, which led to, booze and beer and Ireland and Belfast and living there and drinking more and more and more until I almost died from that. The breakdown of alcoholism, and barricaded into a room in Times Square, having escaped from Montrose, which is a veterans psychiatric hospital. I was there for a year, more than a year. And they told
How old were you when you went there?
I was 38, 37.
Oh,
38.
so older then. Yeah.
And I was put away, and they said, "You're lucky we have him, because this guy's never getting out of here. He is fried."
About you. Wow.
Well, they didn't even know what they hadn't given it a name at that point. Post-traumatic stress disorder. They just brought in Big Pharma to try to experiment on us as wild animals, traumatized, quote unquote. Now let's try 4 of these chemicals and drop them on them. They invented Xanax on us on that unit, and I escaped from there. Because I knew it's.
Oh, what's that story? That sounds interesting.
Well, this art therapist rolls in with the cart and crayons and paper and stuff like that. We're going to make funny hats now. And she put a piece of paper in front of me and some charcoal, and I did a portrait that I have back there, and of myself, and she's looking at it, right? And she said, wait a minute, you did that? Because I had taught myself more completely how to draw using Van Gogh's drawings in a coffee table book that I found inside the monastery. And I started drawing obsessively for some good reason. There was a grotto with the 12 stations of the cross at the monastery, and I would draw the crucifixion over and over and over again with Van Gogh teaching me through his drawings. And I developed that or revisited that skill that I had as a kid as a way somehow to tell everybody what's going on without having to discuss it too much, just show. I became obsessed with the crucifixion. Good Friday is my favorite holiday, right? It was last Friday because they crucified this guy for being dangerous and preaching the Sermon on the Mount, the gospel of love, right? It's the most dangerous set of ideas ever dreamed up by humans, right? And it's the opposite with these scumbags, the devils of DC, right? Kill them all. Kill them all. In the name, Exus said, of Christ. The speech at the communion breakfast 2 weeks ago. Christ, in the name of Jesus, kill them all. It's a holy war. And they've made it real clear about that, right?
How long were you in the Peace Corps over there?
I was supposed to be there for 2 years. It's a 2-year
when you sign up, is that what it is?
Yeah, it's 2 years.
Yeah.
I was there, and after Saigon fell, the revolutionary moments started hitting these other governments. The government of Thailand was overthrown and replaced by a communist military dictatorship, and they threw us out. They threw the Americans out.
Did you?
Cambodia happened also. That was what was his name?
Pol Pot.
Yeah, that happened right there too when I was there. And all of these upheavals and chaos was still Southeast Asia. There was no magic wand. There was boat people, hundreds and hundreds of Vietnamese people that were going to be executed by the North if they were caught. Because they had betrayed and become soldiers or servants of the
imperialists.
Yeah.
Did you feel? You said you went to do the you volunteered because you wanted to make amends a little bit, right, in your life. Did you feel some sense of that while you were doing it over there? That brought some of that too.
I'll tell you another story about that. Katrina, Rita, slammed into the Gulf Coast, and eventually we heard about a Vietnamese fishing community just east of New Orleans, right? And they had built out their refugeeism into a very vibrant and thriving boat-based fishing world, fishing industry, right? And they lived there. Thousands of them became Americans, and they had fishing boats and shrimpers and all this other stuff. And it was slaughtered and slammed by the tsunamis. We heard about it, and we drove a convoy out to this community, right? And we saw their ships like half a mile inland from the tsunami with Vietnamese writing on them, right? And we arrived at this little enclave, and there's these beautiful, 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 humble people are standing there quietly waiting for us, right? And bowing their heads. And we started opening up the the trucks, and we had ice and clothes and food and stuff like that. And they were just so polite and quiet and tender, just like they had been, And this for me felt like a wound was healing, to pay back. Even as crazy and as surreal as it was, these were the same people that now I could help, Unlike the Cajuns, the Cajun Riviera was erased by the tsunami backlash, and every single home in the Cajun Riviera was sucked out into the Atlantic, into the Gulf. And these people who identify themselves as from some other planet, right? As soon as they saw the trucks, they just ripped the doors open and went in and took everything out of the trucks instead of just being nice and polite like the Vietnamese, the Cajuns. But they did give us a big black pot dinner, which you don't ask them what's in there. You just eat it. And there were fucking alligators and bodies and animals hanging off all their trees because they don't bury. They put you in up above ground, concrete or stone facilities, and the tsunamis tore all that to pieces. And there wasn't a house left for about a mile, just the foundations.
Wow.
And these were the Cajuns, the Cajun Rivierans, speaking the Cajun language. But that moment with the Vietnamese for me resonated deeply, because it was just an opportunity to, and I didn't even, I'm not really conscious of any of that stuff while we're doing it, but it felt like that, like something full circle.
So from the time you got home, you were kind of on a mission to kind of, what would you say?
To get the fucking license plate number of the tractor trailer truck that ran me over, called Vietnam.
Did you ever get it?
Yeah. At some really deep gut level, when I got off that plane and when I got to New York, I realized that my enemy was in Washington.
Okay, back up a little bit. You're in Phoenix. You just came to from the
acid.
Yeah. Or in Arizona. And then you end up in New York after that?
My home, my people.
Yeah.
I've been home, quote unquote. And something told me that we had been betrayed in the worst way possible, right? And I was not.
And you hadn't thought it up to that point?
No, I was not political, if you will.
Yeah.
I was not conscious, if you will, at all. And I started to study the history of what put us there, and it hasn't stopped since then. And it rises higher and higher up into the highest echelons of this system. Over and over, they do this, right?
On a personal level, did you start making the art then? When did you start the art? All this art? What year was it? How old were you when that happened?
I was in the monastery, and I came back from the Peace Corps, heartbroken because we were thrown out, and went back to Indiana.
Had you already broken up with your girlfriend at this point?
She broke up with me. She was like,
yep.
See you later.
That happened right when you got back to New York.
Almost, yeah. I went back to Indiana because I had no place else to go, and I didn't know any place else to go. And I had a couple of friends that were monks that had also left the monastery, and I went back to see one of them, and he told me about a movie that was playing up the road about New York, and it was called Taxi Driver. And I went to see the movie and was transformed by what I saw. It was a Vietnam veteran, right? And the same exact discharge date. When the guy asks him, so when did you get back? Oh, May of '73. And this movie just entered into me as not just a story about Travis Bickle in Vietnam and his own heroism around Jodie Foster, but as a medium, right? I want to make them. I don't want to just watch them. I had no idea what that meant. I went back to New York and drew. I started drawing pictures and bullshitted and drew my way into Pratt Institute, which was an art school. They didn't have film school. They had film production courses, and I wanted to make movies. This is 76. I wanted to make movies like that one I had just seen. And I became obsessed with that medium as a way for me to give voice to everything, to my family, to Ireland, to war, to the business of war, to drugs and drug dealing and all of the things that this country had twisted and morphed into as, the world's life-saving energy from the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and then had become this thing throughout all of that, and twisted my knickers into coming home and twisted me into this madman, this feral lost brother, not dead and not alive in some weird form, and this medium just grounded me into a reason to stick around and a reason to learn more about cinema. Cinema is the assemblage of all other mediums, right? And you can do so much with it, right? Especially to identify the white hats and the black hats with cinema, and still is, right?
So you finished.
I started writing screenplays. I wrote the movie about Agent Orange. I wrote a movie about drugs. I wrote a movie about my own people and Irish people, and then moved to Belfast.
How old were you when you moved to Belfast?
This was 1979.
Now at this point, alcohol is a big thing?
Not yet. No.
That was later.
Ireland.
Okay.
Is a bad place to start drinking.
Okay. How old were you when you went over to Belfast?
But I didn't even
again?
really cross the line
there.
I went there to write a movie about the Troubles, about what was going on there with the hunger strikes and the Brits and the Proddies and the Tigs, as they're called, and all this stuff was going on in a violent, riotous way, right? Still in the 6 counties, the Troubles was a bloodbath of fire bombings and bombs and hunger strikes, and I wrote this movie.
You were in the thick of that. You saw that.
I was in the thick of it. At first, just simply writing a story based on Romeo and Juliet, based on my own experience and heartbreak, about a Catholic boy and a Protestant girl, and they're surrounded by all of this dynamic of fated and tragic and doomed violence that surrounds them, but makes them even more in love, falling, more drunk on each other. And wrote that film. The woman I went with took it back to New York. I stayed, and then started drinking more. And then I was recruited into the struggle by a guerrilla organization that asked me to work with them. Which I did because I wanted to be on the right side of history in some guerrilla Irish militarized way.
What did they want you to do?
They wanted me to keep track of the coming and going of the Brits at this big hotel that was allowing the Brits to party and drink and have a lot of fun every night. And they kept warning the owner of this hotel to stop doing that. Please don't serve them. Otherwise, bad things are going to happen to you. And my job was to just go in there as the Yank and just take a lot of notes on the timing and coming and going of this British Army party. And eventually, it got blown up into tiny little toothpicks after warning them, and that's when I had to leave. And I don't know how that's going to play on your podcast, but I had to get out of there. I won't go any further about it because it became an infamous and very famous bloodbath. And then came home and really, really settled into film production and alcohol and eventually drugs, and then near death, and came out of that in 1990.
What made you change? What made you just say, oh, I got to do something to stop this? What made you stop? What made you give up alcohol? What was the changing agent?
Brian was in the room when this woman showed up at this hotel, this cheap hotel in Times Square, and talked me out of the room. I was going to go out the window in a snowstorm, drinking around the clock, just a mess inside of this little pension, with this hallucination on the back of a chair telling me how it fucked. You lost the war. You fucked up your life. You fucked up your dreams. You didn't play for the Yankees. Now you're going to go out the window. It was John Barleycorn coaching me on how to do it. You go down that long hallway there, you take off all your clothes, and you run back and you fly through the window. Sail out, take a swan dive out onto 8th. But when you look down 8th, you make sure the green lights are all lined up. Because that way, if the traffic doesn't kill you,
if the
impact doesn't get you, the traffic will kill you. Now do it. You fucked up everything. Do it. And this woman was sent to my room by someone who knew someone I'd made these last minute "fuck you, I'll see you in hell" phone calls to people, and this guy sent this woman who was in the rooms in AA, and she talked her way into the room. Qualified, told her story, bloodbath, and talked me out of that room and took me to a meeting downtown. And Brian was in the room and put me on a choke chain and would lead me around Lower Manhattan to meetings and poured this 12-step thing into me.
And Brian's a former Vietnam vet as well.
Brian?
Yeah. Just for the audience, they don't know who Brian
Door
is.
gunner.
Yeah.
Yeah. And barely sober himself,
Yeah.
But saw this other guy and really, really took it seriously, I will help him. And somebody I had graduated from high school with, I hadn't seen in 25 years, and he's sitting in the same AA circle.
Wow.
And he helped me also. He gave me a job doing demolition, which I love. Right? They're taking all these buildings down, He gave me a job doing wrecking, hollowing out all these buildings in Soho, just tearing shit apart with sledgehammers, and I got paid for it. And I had to get my apartment back from the woman I married. I didn't have a place to live, and it started there, the beginning of it was chaos and crazy.
Would you describe it as a rebirth, kind of? Were your old self done, or what? How would you describe that?
I describe it by telling a story about F. Scott Fitzgerald, who was famous in literary circles for Great Gatsby, among others, This Side of Paradise, and he was brought out to Hollywood by his handlers and presented to the Hollywood studios as a great writer. And these were these Philistines from Europe who didn't even understand what that meant. They were making movies. At that point, movies was this kind of decadent form, right? And they just kept him on ice in this room in a pension in North Hollywood, and he started drinking himself to death, right? And he said in the book that he wrote, he died. He documented his death by drinking bathtub gin with his wife, and he said there's no second acts in American life, he said, right? And he died at 42 from this disease, from bathtub gin. So the second act is what I would call my 1990 moment, right? The first act was about 12 different movies, most of which were horrible and adventures and, death-defying and important, very personal, very heartbreaking and tragic. All of it was, the Chinese curse, may you have an interesting life. I had an interesting life, And I wasn't up for the rest of it at that point, without some change, a very drastic psychic change, they call it, right? And that started to happen. When I had 66 days, I was told about these babies that had been abandoned.
Hold on, when you say 66 days clean?
66 days clean and sober. A woman told me about these newborns that had been dropped by their drug-addicted mothers and left at these hospitals all over the city. There was like thousands of them. And she told me that they had an OBGYN unit up in Harlem Hospital, and they were looking for volunteers to help them act as surrogates. And I had no idea what she really meant. And I went up there at 66 days. It sounded really interesting because I had been born 2 months premature, addicted to alcohol and smokes from my mother. And went in and did the interview. I didn't tell her I was a serial killing Vietnam veteran maniac. And she showed me the babies in this unit in these bassinets screaming from drug withdrawal and howling and clearly desperately in need of some kind of love. And she picked one up and put it in my arms, right? And you hold the baby feels your warmth, feels your heartbeat, eventually calms down, quiets down, and you make eye contact. You showed me all this stuff to see how I would do as a surrogate, right? And then I walked out of the hospital, right? And I had something to stick around for at that point. Those kids up there were me, right? And I stood on the sidewalk, and I hated God. I wanted to murder this motherfucker, this Charlton Heston CIA god of origin, and I looked up at the sky and I begged some kind of miracle intervention to get me that job. Just get me the job. I wanted that job. And as corny as it sounds, the clouds opened up and the fucking sun came out, right? And I found out I got the job.
That's a great story.
And I spent the next 20 years
doing that
job every weekend from Friday night till Sunday afternoon, working with those babies because they were really, really, really hurting.
But that was very healing for you.
They were me. I was completely connected to that, to them. I don't know about healing. I don't know. I don't know what that means really. I knew I had a reason to stick around besides branching out into the movie world again, and art, and it's called raison d'être. I was an existentialist at that point, where Camus and others identify this as ridiculous and senseless and insane, and my job was to find a reason to be here and do something about it, and practice whatever that is, writing or working with those babies, and revisited my chops as a screenwriter, and started writing those again, wrote the movie about Agent Orange, wrote other stuff, and it looked like things were falling into place again for me and for Brian. He got cast in Jim Carrey's movie. He was in Jackknife with Robert De Niro. Things were really happening, And from the fire captain, Patty Brown, he got sober. He helped me stay sober and got promoted and got his own firehouse, started studying yoga. He was a jiu-jitsu master and started studying yoga, and was, his life was changing for the better. All of us for the better, 9/11.
Then 9/11
destroys everything again. I wrote a novel that's sitting right there that was supposed to be published. So the agent represented Ralph Ellison, who wrote Invisible Man. He said, "This book is going to be on. You're going to be on Charlie Rose. I'm going to pay off all my mortgages with this thing, right?" Yeah, and then he stopped answering my calls after 9/11, and apparently the planes had flew right past his window at the top of Carnegie Towers, the penthouse, and slammed into the towers. And the publishing business had changed like everything else had changed. And they weren't interested in stuff like this. They were interested in, he said, here, I can't be bothered anymore. They want firemen and they want heroes. Things have changed, sorry. And that one was a near miss again, like the other one with the Agent Orange screenplay. And those kinds of near misses are shattering, like the art gallery story. And so here I am, at COVID-19, 9/11.
Go to.
How are we doing? Are you getting what you want?
Oh, that's fantastic. Don't change anything. I want to hear. I know you've been involved in a lot of conflicts in a lot of places. So kind of tell me some of the highlights of those and why, or anything you want to talk about. Because I think that's an important part of who you are.
Yeah. Saving lives.
You've never gotten that out of your system, have you?
Why would I? The Superman costume's still in the closet. That's what I was taught. Save the world. Somebody's got to do it. And it's not like an ego thing either. It's circumstantial more than anything else. It's what you're supposed to do, according to what I come from. You're supposed to do that stuff. You're not supposed to just consider it some kind of fucking video game.
So Vietnam would have been the first thing that you leaned into, I think, even though you were,
the first real opportunity for that. Yeah.
The second would have been the Peace Corps.
Yeah.
What was the third one?
The babies.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what was after that?
Actually, the third one was being recruited by the Irish National Liberation Army.
Oh, right. Okay, right. Yeah, because you thought you were changing that over there.
We thought we could win that war against the Brits.
Yeah.
Really win it, because these weren't provisional IRA. These were real committed guerrillas.
Right.
And they were doing the dirty work of guerrilla war against the Brits.
Yeah.
And I respected that more than the provisionals, which had become kind of a corrupted, the joke was IRA, I ran away, like they had been watered down, if you will, or aged out, if you will. But these kids were university educated and very, very serious about uniting Ireland for the first time into 32 counties instead of 26 down below and the 6 that were still English. And so that was a big deal.
So after that was the babies.
Yeah.
And then what was after the babies?
Yeah.
Was that Iraq?
I'm trying to think of the 9/11, first responder downtown for that. Yugoslavia, 1998, 1999, during the NATO bombing, working with the refugees, bringing them back into their villages.
Did you do that for an organization, or you just went over there?
Well, actually, Somalia was a big one too.
What year was he?
Somalia was 92. I heard about this hunger that was killing thousands and thousands of African people while I was working at the hospital.
Okay.
And it became a public thing that there was a starvation going on in Africa on the Horn, which was still is one of the most vital pieces of real estate on the planet because of the oil tankers going back and forth. And the Irish Relief Agency, which was contracted by the UN, decided they were going to try to build a refugee camp in Somalia, and they needed someone to build that camp for them. And I volunteered for them and talked my way into doing that and got parachuted into that, built the camp, spent a year there, got kidnapped 4 times at gunpoint.
Tell me one of those stories.
Well, these kids were 12, 13, 14-year-olds with Kalashnikovs and Ray-Bans and pickup trucks, and they wanted their people fed, not anyone else's. And they knew that if they kidnapped me, because I was in charge of the food, and scared the shit out of me, their people would get fed, or so they thought. And this happened 4 times, and I couldn't do it. I didn't do it, and it kept happening. And I kept losing weight. I was like 100 pounds when I came back, like a bag of bones, covered in infections. Almost died, but it was worth it because I was feeding these babies. These children were starving to death, and it was the same as Ireland. There wasn't a famine in Ireland in the 19th century. it was political. Kissinger put this criminal in power in Somalia to guard the Horn, and gave him hundreds of millions of American dollars in military aid and support and all that. And he corrupted the whole thing and became a dictator. And he scorched earth his way out of there when the people of Somalia rose up and threw him out and left everything in chaos.
Was it like a civil war there? Is that what was going on?
It was,
or was this
clan
fracture?
war, if you will, but much more about chaos. And there wasn't really, a constitutional democracy. It was Bedouin people wandering with their camels and all of that, through the North Horn of Africa, without anything left except chaos and competition between the tribes, and drought is what caused the food shortages. Two consecutive years of drought, and there was nothing left to eat. And babies, I had to bury 800 babies, bury them without shroud cloth. And a book, you can read it. The Irish Agency connected with that because of what happened with the hungers, the Irish famine, and built out this agency that intervened on behalf of the UN with money, and needed someone to do that job on the ground. And I talked my way into that job. That was 92 and 93. And then Kosovo and Yugoslavia was 97.
What did you do over there?
Well, there was a refugee camp in Albania, and the Holy War, if you will, had driven so many of the Muslim practitioners and their families out of Kosovo. It was the breadbasket of Eastern Europe. It was lush and filled with rivers. A gold mine, the only gold mine in Europe, was there in Kosovo, and the Serbies wanted it. The Serbs wanted to go in, take everything, fuck all the women, and kill all the men, and they were doing that. And then NATO decided to intervene. But before NATO intervened, those refugees wanted to go home really badly, and the Red Crescent showed up, and I volunteered to help them bring the convoys of Kosovar people back into their home villages. And when we got there, there were mass graves and dead horses, and everything had been stripped or stolen. There was one mosque. They had pushed all of the animals into this mosque and nailed the doors closed, and then lit the mosque on fire. This was their way of cleansing Europe of Islam, and the villages that were Christian and Christian based were left alone by the Serbs. This was their holy war, an attempt to repeat the other wars that were attempting to,
cleanse it or
cleanse
whatever.
Europe of Islam and Muslim practices. It's still on in that way,
How long were you over there?
Almost a year. Filmed the whole thing.
And when you get home, are you wiped out? Are you exhilarated?
No. I got off the plane and got back to Harlem. I came out of the subway, and I realized that Harlem was being ethnically cleansed by real estate interests and Giuliani and money, and they wanted Harlem to become Soho. But the only problem was that it was black, so they had to get the black people out of there. So they just let the heroin dealers have fun and go crazy and start killing people, right? And I realized that this was an American style, an American economic and Giuliani style. Giuliani gave it a name, Giuliani Times, I think it's called. No, Giuliani time. Yeah. To get rid of the people that owned Harlem and had lived there for generations and invented jazz and all kinds of other, really vibrant, Negro cultural things. And they wanted it. They wanted what was underneath it. And one guy told me, he said, the reason we're taking over this thing is because underneath where we stand right now is solid rock. And we can build condo towers 1,000 feet tall on this solid stuff. Not like downtown, and it's just salty and mushy. And we had to build a big bathtub around the Twin Towers. but this is
Solid.
straight up. And they wanted it, so that's what came out of the novel that I wrote about the ethnic cleansing of Harlem.
After Kosovo, was that
and then 98, 99, and then I got all of these projects going, because I film everything where I go if I can.
Yeah.
9/11, filmed it, was there.
You went downtown and
first week inside the North Tower pile, trying to find my friend Patty, the captain. Left there with enormous loss of him. Cities in ruins.
I saw that film footage. It's daytime and it's black.
Yeah.
Dark.
Yeah. And who did it? Six Wahhabis, teenagers with box cutters? I don't know.
How did that impact you personally? I mean emotionally.
Devastation, I still choke up over his loss. We were close. We had a lot of same name, same age. He did 2 tours in Nam, family of alcoholic crazies, fire department. Mm-hmm. I grew up in the fire department. My father's a battalion chief when he went out, when he retired. 35 years inside a world which is about fire and danger and a devotion to that job. And the families that are in that world are equally devoted to it and proud of it, of being of service, doing service. The city would burn to the ground without that,
Right.
It still might.
Right. And then after that, was it Iraq?
Yeah.
You went over there?
Yeah.
What was that like? And you went in before the bombing, right?
I went in way before the bombing. I went in there because my 3rd grade nun spent the whole year making the Garden of Eden and the Tigris and Euphrates valleys and the headwaters of all culture and life and science.
You were taught that in the 3rd grade.
The most magical year of my life because of the way she presented it. The Garden of Eden, right? Adam and Eve. And the Tigris and Euphrates Valley turned out to be Iraq at this point, right?
Yeah.
And they were going to turn it into a fucking parking lot.
So you went over there.
Powell, according to Condoleezza Rice and George Bush, right? Saddam Hussein did 9/11. Right? The joke among the Iraqis is, how did George Bush know about Saddam having weapons of mass destruction? And the joke, the gag punchline is, well, his father showed him the receipts. Saddam Hussein was an ally, and 20% of the American gasoline at the tank was provided by Iraqi raw crude oil, sweet crude it's called. And he was getting too big for his britches. And they accused him, they hung 9/11 on him.
Did you, how did you get over there? How did you get in there?
I talked my way into, I sold shares in a movie I was going to make to all my friends for $100. Landed in Amman and I talked my way into the Iraqi embassy and got the Minister of Culture on the phone and told him, look, I'm a Vietnam vet. I have cameras. I want to make a record of what they're about to do to you, and they're going to turn they're going to turn you into a parking lot. Would you let me come in? Please let me make a record of this. And he gave me a visa.
Wow.
And I drove in now. It's called the GMCs. They were like the Ubers of the day, and landed in Baghdad in October of 2002. And started filming every single thing I could get my hands on because I believed and knew at some gut level that this was all going to be leveled by shock and awe. And it was.
How long were you over there?
Almost a year.
Wow.
Yeah. And recording.
What was the craziest thing you saw over there?
A 5-year-old girl who had been orphaned by the Iran war. 5-year-old girls, chain smoking cigarettes, singing Michael Jackson songs, and a pickpocket. And 5 years old.
Wow.
And the sweetest thing you could dream of. beautiful. And she knew every Michael Jackson lyric, and she's chain smoking while she's singing, and she's a pickpocket. That says a lot about the Iraqi people, because they could quote James Joyce. They were computers, software code writers. They were surgeons. They were classical musicians. They were singing in these tongues that you could practically deafen with their voices, the howling that they do with traditional music there.
Were you only filming over there, or did you do medical stuff as well?
I realized that there was thousands of children that were refugees and orphaned, and I tried to do as much as possible to try to find safe places for those kids. But primarily it was spent with the camera, because I had realized and identified that instrument as the most dangerous weapon ever made, besides all this gun culture. The camera itself was far more dangerous than any other instrument ever made, if it's in the right hands, because it doesn't lie, right?
What happened after Iraq? Where'd you get? What was
Katrina
the next thing?
and Rita.
Oh, Katrina and Rita.
Yeah.
Was that the last one?
No.
What was after that?
Haiti.
Oh, Haiti, the earthquake?
Yeah.
How long were you over there?
We got there 3 days after the quake dropped the city, and then spent about a month and a half doing surgery in Port-au-Prince. And they would tell us that the frackers were right off the port in these big ships and big operations. They were fracking down into the seabed, and they were feeling the vibrations themselves right there. The fracking causes earthquakes, right? And people told us they could feel things going on like that underneath them, with the tectonic shifts, fracking into what they hoped would be a gusher of oil or gas, right? And then the big one hit, 8.2.
How long were you there? How long did you say you were there?
I don't know, 6 weeks, something like that. We ran out of supplies, ran out of mojo, ran out of everything.
Just chaos, I would assume.
Got into this little rust bucket of a bus, got to the border, and we were hijacked. We were hijacked by these Dominican macheteros with black machetes and Ray-Bans and walkie-talkies. And they took us away into this wooded area and put a big tree in front of the bus and a big tree behind the bus and lit the trees on fire to trap us there. And we thought, this is it, we're going to be chopped up and disappeared, and they're going to take everything of value inside of the bus, inside our bags. And the doctors started negotiating and talked to them. And then the nurses who were born also in Haiti began praying in Creole, louder and screaming more and more loudly for divine intervention, if possible, and trying to scream up to the skies to make God or Jesus hear them, begging for some miracle. And they were rocking the bus back and forth and praying in Creole. And it must have spooked these guys, who were probably Catholic, Dominican, Republican, something. Maybe we shouldn't do that to these people. Maybe there's a curse here, and they pulled one of the trees away and let us take off to the airport. And my hair, which was kind of salt and pepper-ish, went bone white during that afternoon. I got to the airport and I threw the camera on it, because I had filmed all of our experience in Haiti also. About 4 hours of operations and surgeries and dangerous, crazy chaos, because nobody was in charge at that point. Haiti remains a study in post-colonial chaos and corruption and savagery. And I put the camera on, and there's this huge head of white hair, like a halo, because I knew we were going to die. I knew that was it. This was it. There's no way out of this one. And these women, something happened. I don't know, miracle or some spooking, you can explain it in a million different ways, but we got out, we got away. So it's been tough ever since then, for a bunch of reasons, to keep doing that. It's exhausting. And
you're not getting any younger.
And that's part of it too. Yeah.
Right.
COVID I got real sick from I volunteered for the first experimental vaccine. The VA call went out to ask anyone who had been exposed to it, and we had been humping these body bags out of the shelters with the National Guard guys, and I figured I'd been exposed. And they said, if you've been exposed, we would like to inoculate you with this experimental vaccine. And it was AstraZeneca's, and they hooked it into the VA operation at 23rd Street. And I volunteered right away because we didn't know what was going to happen with this thing, right? And I got the vax, and then I was up on 125th Street on my bike, and somebody was pointing down underneath a truck, and there was a body lying underneath this truck on 125th Street. And I dragged this body out, right? And I didn't know, no pulse, no heartbeat. And I started doing chest compressions on this guy. He threw up all over me, right? And came back and asked me for a cigarette. And I knew he was okay, but he gave me COVID. He gave me his COVID. And I got really, really sick from that. And they don't know quite why. It triggered also the latent poisons and lesions and cancers from ground zero. A lot of first responders started getting the same sicknesses and the same lumps and weird shit growing all over them, and especially in the lungs, COVID, COPD rather. My lungs were shot for a while and had to take all these medications and 6 surgeries. The one you see out there, that's one of them. And that's where I'm kind of left right now, with all of that haunting, but all of these new wars. And look who's in charge of that, And New York is a target, has been. We're on high alert right now. This is where the sleeper cells could wake up or be woken up. Kids are building bombs in their cellars in Brooklyn, nail bombs using fertilizer, and let's go to the internet and you can learn how to build a bomb on the internet. All of that is on. Could happen tonight. Look who's in charge of my life, of my fate.
I want to go back to Vietnam for a minute. What's fascinating to me in interviewing all the guys that I've talked to is that a year and a half, 2 years of someone's life when they're 17, 18, 19.
Yeah.
Reverberates throughout, affects their marriages, affects their job. And it's shocking to me how many guys I've talked to that they're older when it really hits. The PTSD kind of comes back with a vengeance. They have visions or they have dreams, and it's I'm not sure people understand the cost of.
No, they don't. They
war
can't.
on the guys.
I don't
that
blame
are there.
them anymore
No.
for not knowing.
No,
for not understanding.
How could you know?
Right. They said we were old men in young men's bodies, and we had 1,000-yard stare. And when I came home, there was a tremendous amount of hostility by the hippies. They hated us. They hated me and made no bones about it. And that hurt way more than the war itself. That kind of rejection, that kind of accusation, and the loss of the war in my world doubled, tripled it as a stain, as a shame, as a trauma, right? An unspeakable trauma of shame, taking the blame for that as some deep, deep, deep way. And it's still like that with returnees from Iraq and Afghanistan. They can't or won't talk about it, and they wind up sitting in the bedroom with a barrel at their head. It's been addressed to some extent by the government, by the VA, by the shrinkers. They call it post-traumatic stress. They treat it with drugs, with psilocybin and horses, and but it's the basis for this economy, war, right? Oil. And look around, oil, war, money, Exxon, Texaco, Trump, oil, oil, oil. Take it, Venezuela, take it, Iraq, take it, Afghanistan, take it, Afghanistan, opiates.
Vietnam, opiates.
Oh, the book I have back there, The Politics of Heroin in Southeast Asia, 1962 to 1973.
Yeah.
Bringing it home in body bags. The North weaponized heroin from China White up in the North, brought it down and offered the bag. First bag is free, and fucked up so many jungle grunts.
Yeah.
Hooked them.
Yeah.
And then morphine hooked them, and then they came home, and it spread into what became just chaos and crime and death and overdosing and the businesses of opium and war and heroin.
Do you feel like, if I was going to look at you, I would say much of your life in your kind of coming to grips with PTSD or whatever we want to call it is your activeness, your reaching out to try and make amends, as you said, or to help people.
Well,
we
turn the corner. I had a great shrink at the VA. He was in my corner for 30 years. I would go there crazy and screaming, and he would listen. He was a great listener. And when I left the shrink session, I would feel like, okay, I can continue to live and do my thing with service and volunteerism and my art. I can keep going. And then I called him up one day and I said, look, I know about ideation, and I've had that. I was luckily very bad at that. I tried 4 times, but is there something called homicidal ideation? Right? and this was 2015 when Trump was running. And he said, oh, that's really interesting. Come in, we'll talk about it, right? And he said, you've turned a corner. Because they used to say in the nut house, they said, get down off the cross. We need the wood, because it becomes a kind of twisted persona of identification, victimization, if you will, and whatever that means, which turns into behavior, which turns into volunteerism, which turns into risking my life over and over and over again, which turns into trying to make amends for what was done to those poor people in Hanoi and Haiphong and everywhere else by my government, by my country, not the people, the corporations who design the agendas and design the imperial incursions and design the wars.
Yeah.
For their own selfish and business reasons.
Yeah.
Right. And I didn't know any of that really until it hit home that here was a guy who was dangerous and making the moves and had to be stopped. Right. And I got talked out of it, obviously, by this shrink, He said, they're going to come after me if you do it. and that worked, that kind of.
And you've thrown yourself into your art.
Well, that's where,
and people need to see it.
I doubled up on pouring it into not slapping cops or wrapping my bike chain around city bike muscle bound bond traders who are texting and riding their bikes the wrong way in the bike lane. I put it into the work, try to put it into the mediums of cinema or literature or this work here, and make it expressive enough that I'm happy with it, that I'm trying to say something about garbage, about Agent Orange, and about war itself, like that's what I've tried to do to keep from jumping off a roof or killing this guy, because there's a silo out in Colorado or Utah, where they put all the craziest motherfuckers, right? The assassination guys.
In Colorado, yeah.
Yeah, right.
The underground prison or whatever they call
It's
that.
a missile silo that they turned into
Yeah.
a high security jail, right?
Yeah.
That's where all, next to Matthew McConaughey's father, You too?
So, okay, in the end,
do they deserve it? Does this guy deserve to have his head blown off? Did Hitler deserve it? And there was a plan, almost pulled it off.
Yeah.
To stop Hitler would stop the war, wouldn't it? And there was a big argument and a plot, and they almost did it. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the minister, the Episcopal priest, was involved in it, even though it violated everything he believed in as the Ten Commandments. And they nailed it at the last minute, and he got hung. And all of those are racing all around my head all the time with this guy. And the agenda that they're dictating to him to operate, right? Venezuela has the third largest oil deposits on earth, not Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
Not the Philippines, Venezuela, Iran, right? The Iran Oil Company became British Petroleum for some funny reason in 1954.
Yeah.
Okay. Texaco named a tanker after Condoleezza Rice. Her name is on the tanker. So, and these are things I've learned.
War is big business.
Well, I've learned about that. I wanted to learn really what is this thing? Why is it the opposite of constitutional rule of law democracy now?
Yeah.
Those documents meant so much to me as a kid, one man, one vote, right? The Declaration of Independence, right? No kings. It was so powerful because it connected to the Irish struggle with kings imposing their savagery on Irish people, and it plays out like that culturally and even genetically, and it's still there. We're still hostage to these corporate agendas.
Yeah.
Right? If they put boots on the ground and try to take Carg Island or find the uranium inside Pickaxe Mountain, you're going to have thousands and thousands of boots on the ground if this thing goes bad again.
Yeah.
And Israel and did I quote Kissinger for you?
Yeah. What I found when we talked on the phone that you said, I thought that was so interesting. You were telling me the horrors that you saw in the surgical room, right? Of cleaning it and everything.
Sucking chest wounds.
And at the same time, when I said, was it, I thought you were going to go, oh man, it was rough. But then you said, no, that you felt so useful in that place.
Yeah.
That you were doing something.
Well, I'm a carpenter. I like making stuff and using tools and building and creating and the crisis medicine part is like carpentry in so many mundane but real ways,
Yeah.
Keep this guy alive.
Yeah.
Right? And you can. It's not like you're waving a magic wand and hoping for God, You're clamping off veins and finding the bleeders and really mechanically keeping a human being alive, not a dog or a kid who's screaming for his mother on the table like that,
Did you generally fly with the same nurses and doctors?
Yeah.
Was it like a team?
There was a short period. It was like, I don't know, less 4, 5, 6 months, something like that. I forget now exactly, but basically the same pilots, the same staffers. Yeah.
It must have felt like you guys were kind of against the world. I would think that it was just
we didn't have any real contemplative moments.
No. But I mean, just the fact that it was so immediate, the job was at hand, and you guys were all a well-oiled machine in that chaos
and loving it.
Yeah,
loving the job that we were doing. There's a real compelling component to it, that does have it's the opposite of war itself,
I found that with the dust off pilots and the the medics and the people that worked the dust off helicopters had that same, they felt like they were doing the opposite. They were trying to put the pieces back together instead of blowing
them
out
of there.
Yeah.
No, it's human beings are capable of a wide range of things, depending on who's teaching you and why, Children become mass murderers like that guy in California. I'm born on the same day as the Boston Strangler, right? He had to sit underneath the kitchen table while his father broke his mother's fingers over the edge of the kitchen table over and over and over again. And that's what bred into him this murderous rage, right? Ted Bundy was held captive by his mother in a closet for 6 years. 6 years sitting in a closet, and that's what made him Ted Bundy.
It's maybe that's the thing about war. That war generates extremes, right? Extremes terrible and extreme positives, and probably because the gap is so wide that doing an act of heroism, or you know what I'm saying, it pushes the human to the very ends of what they're capable of,
and at the very core of kill or be killed. It reduces life itself to the essence of it, kill or be killed, and it's animal. We are animals at the end of the day, right? Animals who have a drive to survive, and will attack what feels like a threat, and war really vibrates all of that. And if you're guided through the training of it, and you're given all these weapons, then you're a bad motherfucker, especially if you believe in the cause of it, especially that part, Nazis, slaughtering Jews and taking over Europe. Get on the plane and stop them. That kind of romantic Hollywood style, Haiti style white hat offering. For a kid, it's really, really almost. It has a corruption to it, because it's so immediate and compelling and propagandistic, if you will. The conditioning of it, the romance of it, is there as a way to get you to volunteer. I went right there the next day to sign up because of the circumstances of my own life, and my own world of immigrants and war and their own indoctrination and their own reaction and their own conditioning to their own tragedy. They didn't want to come here. They were heartbroken by having to leave Ireland. They never wanted to be here, and then they were dropped into this roaring 20s, which crashed in 29 into a decade of savagery and deprivation, right? There was no economy. There was no money. There was nothing except rotten food and dog shit and horse shit all over Hell's Kitchen, right? Don't come back here, they were told, without something in that box to eat. And they would go out as children and fight over rotten food. This was New York. This was America. And they were worse off in some ways than they were in Ireland as peasants. And this was a decade until what happened? War brought the economy back out of it. And they had doors open to them as soldiers, once again, to prove how loyal they were to this country. And once again, to prove their loyalty, they offered me up. See, Patrick loves America. We love America. Gold Star families, they were called. And this is a system that's genius in its way to get cannon fodder going and volunteering and doing their dirty business,
Yeah.
and still is, You're never going to see a Trump son or daughter or you're just going to see, what's his name? The new 19-year-old. He's not going to wear a uniform.
Yeah, for sure.
We're going to be the ones. And that's a class thing. If you want to go there, I've gone there and examined all of it through the class prism of class consciousness, and lowest end of the lumpen proletariat does the dirtiest work of all, the heavy lifting, and dies.
Yeah.
And they don't. They get rich, because they have graduate degrees from the School of Economics at Penn, and learn about the business.
Yeah, the business of it. Yeah.
And chase the business of it rather than come home in a box or with half your body blown off. Your balls. Almost 2,000 Iraq and Afghanistan returnees came home without their balls because of IEDs. Imagine coming home without your balls.
Yeah.
Right? What are you going to say to your wife after that?
Yeah.
What are you going to do after that?
Well, Patrick, Paul and Brian said you have lived a very interesting life, and they are not lying.
and I don't go out of my way, to have an interesting life.
No, I know. It's just
it is what it is.
You know what? You got the call and you just answered it. You just said yes. You just went.
I care about people. I care about my country. I care about the rule of law. I care about the constitutional guarantees of checks and balances. I care about this ideal that was authored by these people in the face of British imperialism. It's still a good idea. It's still a great set of principles by which to live, right? And it's being violated now all day long again, right? The skills I have as a medic and the skills I have as an artist and the yoga practice helps, turn it from sickening contempt and rage into something other than that. And I go back here and write something or make another piece of art about it and stay out of jail, It's my stay out of jail card.
Yeah.
All of this.
Yeah.
I've been in jail and it's not something I'm happy about doing unless I could focus so completely and learn how to levitate inside a jail cell, just focus. And the most devastating dismemberment of my faith and belief was going there and
into Vietnam
and seeing the truth, right? Especially after it got more and more ridiculous and carpet bombs began dropping
and that was
napalm began being the weapon of choice.
And was the irony was not missed on you because you were at that base where the B-52s were.
Yeah, and the crop dusters for the Agent Orange planes also were there. They were all there. Everything
Is that where you were exposed at the base then?
Yeah. Yeah, they would load up and we would smell it and feel it, and there was chemicals in the air.
Was it actually orange?
No.
They just called it
that. The spray was orange once it hit the jungles. No, it was chemicals. It was liquid. And the dusters made it atomized. There was a tint to it, but it was more sunlight through the
I see.
Through the chemicals that were in the clouds. It was two, Agent Orange and Agent Blue, different colors, based on what the chemical makeup of the spray was.
So tell me about your health. Where's your health at now? You said you had some heart stuff, some cancer stuff.
I'm covered with lesions and lumps that can become threatening if the lesions and lumps go into the system itself. So they carve out, hope to catch it before it enters into the the bigger, broader system.
How often do you have to go in?
When it gets
scary looking, you follow it a little bit?
I report it, yeah, and I go and show it to them, and they decide what to do about it. The lungs have come back pretty completely based on avoiding some of the poisons and some medication and stuff like, but yoga, also breathing and stuff like that, breathing practices really helped a lot.
Well, dude, you hauling that stuff up the stairs is impressive. Well, not many people even way younger than you could do that.
My devotion is to my health, right? I mean, it's my job to either be healthy or be a mess, and I see a lot of Vietnam vets that have just let their health go and, are just stumbling along and old looking and bent over. And I don't want to go like that. I don't want to go by my own hand. I smoked a lot of cigarettes and I realized I was paying them to kill me.
Right.
And I didn't want to go like my mother died from emphysema. She smoked herself into the hole. She didn't stop. And I'm drowning. And she was drowning from emphysemic fluids. And this is a business, big tobacco, got away with it.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to go like that. I'd like to go fucking the shit out of somebody and dropping dead on her. It would be nice at the age of 100, That's really, that's possible. And that's because I'm healthy, not because I'm eating chemicals and smoking and using all of those to stay numb, right?
Yeah.
The numbing component. Don't feel it.
Yeah.
Just numb it. And people are getting bigger and bigger and, staying as numb as possible to everything around them, including children. They're doing that with vape and Juul and all of those things.
Yep.
And that fucking thing.
Yep.
Numbing
That's
themselves
totally
and
true.
distracting themselves. And I'm watching that from the outside, which is terrifying to see, the medical component of it and the business model of that too.
It's insane.
Invasion of the body snatchers.
Yes, for sure.
He's screaming when he's brought in the opening scenes, and they don't believe him. They think he's out of his fucking mind. And at the very end, the pods are in the back of that pickup truck headed for Los Angeles, Well, maybe this guy has something, Like
your dad, I want to hear that. Was your dad proud when you went over there? No.
Yes, he was. He was proud that I graduated from college, the first one in the whole entire extended family. He showed up at Notre Dame and I got my degree. He was
what was your degree in?
Political theory and theology. And he was sobbing sitting next to my mother. She said that. And this guy never did anything like that. He was sobbing with pride and then never really said it like that about volunteering. But I knew that it broke his heart that my brother ducked the draft and made a point of telling my father that, and I could see how really it hurt him to see my brother, my older Irish twins. He was 11 months older than me and did it specifically, I think, to fuck my father up too, and did damage in that way to my father's patriotism, if you will, and commitment. And I saw that happen, and that's when my opportunity came to right that wound, if you will, and step into his boots and make my father, there's a culture of, man, you got to be a man, all that stuff, and then this was an opportunity to prove that to him,
The base you were at, how was the food there?
It wasn't food. There was basically nothing at that air base. You had mostly LRPs, it's called.
What? LRPs? What did you call
LRPs? Is long. I forget the long. It has an acronym to it, which is basically rip it open and see what's in there. A peanut butter sandwich and a 4-pack of Newports, and candy.
It wasn't sea rations.
It's just like
sea rations.
It's called LRPs. We call them LRPs.
Was there any of that you liked or didn't like?
No, nothing. No, I didn't really care either. There was nothing like that. They did have like one hot meal or two a week.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really? So that's pretty primitive then.
That air base, particularly up in the mountains of Thailand, was very primitive. There was hardly anything there except B-52s and crop dusters and RC-130s.
Was there a bar on base?
No, it wasn't like that.
It was totally primitive.
It was just about air power and planes. Yeah.
And did you do an R&R?
A very brief 3-day in Bangkok, most of which because I was at that point crazy in some ways that I don't even realize even to this day. I felt like I had blood all over me, right? That I was covered in blood. And I sat in a bathtub for almost 3 days trying to scrub the blood off my body. And I actually hired this hooker who was a hooker to come and just scrub me, not fuck her, just scrub me. I wish to this day I could find that girl and thank her and apologize for having put her through that. I just sat in this fucking tub and scrubbed practically till I was bleeding, because I had some feeling about what was I was covered in blood from all the operations and all this stuff that I was cleaning off the tables and my own surgical ops, surgical clothing. So I just sat there in the tub.
Wow. Dude.
And scrubbed. Took a break every once in a while. Billy Joel was on the jukebox in the coffee shop. Yeah. Or Piano Man will always make me remember sitting in that fucking tub. Yeah.
That is crazy.
I wrote a little short story about it called R&R. And yeah, that's what it was. It was to this day, like, what was I thinking? Like, I wasn't covered in blood, but I felt like I was, and it was, I had to get it off. I had to get it out. I had to get it off my body.
I guess
that was R&R.
That's the part of the war though that's so right. You don't even know how it's affecting you because you couldn't even put it into words.
Well, that's why felt that way. That's why they should never be started, because they never end. They never end. Wars will stay with us and in us and around us long after they're declared over, like with Holocaust survivors. Just a quick story about that.
Okay.
The poor woman I'd married, she found a shrink. She heard about this guy who was treating Holocaust survivors and had started to treat Vietnam vets. I went to see this guy. His name is Dr. Chaim Shatton, himself a Holocaust survivor, a shrink, a psychiatrist, who started treating Jews who had fled Europe and landed in New York after the war was over. And 15 years, almost to the day, had what they believed they called a nervous breakdown, which wasn't, he said. They were finally, with distance and time, able to process the atrocities of the camps, and broke down and broke out and broke through and began feeling all of it and remembering all of it in ways that the body helps prevent them from doing, to function even at the most basic level, and started seeing these people and treating them, right? And then he said, I started seeing Vietnam veterans also with the same exact, and it was 15 years to the day with me sitting in his office on Central Park West with a breakdown of sorts of remembering and feeling and processing it in a way that I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know why I was having flashbacks, so-called, or any of that stuff. And I'm in the grip of the age of diagnosis, right? And he gave it a name called delayed stress syndrome. He gave it his own name, which eventually years later became PTSD, post-traumatic stress. But he gave it his name called delayed stress syndrome. Delayed by time, and the safe vessel of New York and distance allowed these people to finally thaw out. And I went to see this guy not knowing what he was going to do or say or anything like that. I went because she told me to go, and she brought me there to the first meeting, and shrinkage was not part of my world ever. You don't go to a doctor. You don't ever do anything like that, But I went, and he did kind of crack it open a little bit, explaining to me about the Holocaust and explaining to me about you're not having a breakdown.
At that point, have you told anybody about what you witnessed?
No.
Nobody.
No, because it became a deal breaker with girls. It became a deal breaker with my society at large. It became so shameful. The secrets stayed in there for a big load of reasons that ate me alive, right? And so that stayed like that until I had some ways of using my art to give it a voice or to give it a release, if you will, right?
When you had flashbacks, were that flashbacks of stuff you'd saw on the plane?
All kinds of
just all stuff,
just
nightmarish stuff.
Yeah, like this kind of stuff is wired into me probably because of my Irish or cultural or.
Well, I know all the vets I know. The war starts cropping up. It starts triggering feelings in everybody,
and that's the good news.
Yeah,
because it's a very, very important set of lessons, and it's a very, very important set of animal learning curves, if you will.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, if you don't drink it, if you don't smoke it, you have it as a tool bag to survive it, which is really what I'm hoping, based on your calendar of this crisis, that I'll have it still in me to figure out. I've been in 5 different countries where the governments imploded or collapsed. Russia, Somalia,
Haiti,
Yugoslavia, Haiti, all and Iraq. You don't want to be in a food riot.
Yeah.
It's fucking scary.
Yeah.
9/11 made the city scary. COVID-19 made the city crazy scary.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't breathe on me. That kind of stuff.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And it's still there. But so is this kind of wired into me, animal-like survivalism, if you will. It's there, to be called on, I guess.
Well,
tomorrow.
You know what? You have an energy that just radiates out of you. I can see it. You radiate. I mean, you don't act. I told this to Aaron when we got off the phone. I was like, he doesn't sound like a guy his age.
Right.
You're an energized human being. You're a special dude.
I want to make art, protect children, chase girls, and stick around, and be healthy, healthy as I possibly can be. I'm 75. That's crazy. That's fucking insane to say that.
Because you don't feel 75, do you? Inside, in your brain.
Yeah. I want to go out and I want to go down to spring training and pitch my way onto the Yankees. Put the gun on me, motherfuckers. I still got it, like that. That's how I've. It's not quite like that genetically, anymore.
Well, I think you've proven. I mean, you put your money where your mouth is. You know what I mean? You had flesh in the game. You put yourself into situations with people that didn't know you.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
Which is pretty phenomenal, my friend. That's pretty phenomenal.
I'm driven by class consciousness, right? And this is a class that runs things and owns things. And
every war is that, though, no matter what.
And
that's how it rolls.
And my class, as Orwell kept repeating in 1984, the future belongs to the proles. He kept saying that in every chapter. The future belongs to the proles. I don't know if that's going to happen, class war, if you will, or revolution. I don't know.
I doubt it.
All right.
Enough. I doubt it with that.
All right. Now
dude, thank you. I'll bust down.
All right. So.
If you or someone that you know isn't getting the VA benefits that you've earned, please click this link. We've teamed up with a group of experts that can help veterans build stronger VA claims and get the benefits they deserve. Please click this link for a free consultation.